Let's see what happens to her. That was Donald Trump back in 2016 calling for Secret Service agents guarding Hillary Clinton to drop their guns. A comment that was slammed as inflammatory and dangerous, but not investigated. There was also a social media post from 2024, which we won't show you, where Donald Trump amplified an image of President Biden hogtied in the back of a pickup truck. Again, the post was slammed as inflammatory and dangerous, but Donald Trump wasn't investigated. So if Donald Trump cleared those bars, what makes this post from former FBI Director James Comey so much worse? So bad, in fact, that the Secret Service is investigating James Comey for making a threat on Donald Trump's life. What do these seashells arranged in a numerical sequence mean? DNI Tulsi Gabbard says it's clear that James Comey was issuing a hit on Donald Trump. Congressman Tim Burchett says Comey should be arrested. Trump campaign manager Chris LaCivita says he'd raid Comey's effing house. And Trump himself says it means Comey wants him assassinated. Quote, a child knows what that meant. Does Matt Gaetz? Because here's a tweet from Matt Gaetz saying he'd 86th Republican leadership. Did Matt Gaetz assassinate Kevin McCarthy, Ronna McDaniel, or Mitch McConnell? Did he try? No, of course not. He was bragging about getting them ousted from Republican leadership. So why is 86ing someone suddenly a death threat? How is it worse than saying maybe the Second Amendment people can stop Hillary Clinton, something Donald Trump did as well? Or again, promoting an image of a sitting president hogtied in the back of a pickup truck. Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, host of Independent Americans podcast Paul Rieckhoff, Washington Post national reporter and MSNBC contributor Carol Leonnig, and former senior special agent with the Secret Service and former special assistant U.S. prosecutor Christopher McClinic. Carol, give us a little bit of the background here. What's the beef? Remind us with James Comey.
I liked your wind up there, Katie, because it speaks to my heart in the Secret Service, which is, how they decide when there's an actual threat against the president and his life. The Secret Service did not think there was a threat against the president's life when Donald Trump suggested and had a picture of Joe Biden hogtied to the back of a pickup truck, which many people thought was promoting violence in its imagery. The beef with former FBI Director Comey runs deep. Donald Trump in 2017 called on Comey privately in various meetings to exonerate him, to exculpate him, to say that the Russian probe had nothing to do with Donald Trump and did not implicate him in any way or his campaign. And Comey essentially brushed it off because he was an independent director of the FBI and he knew that the investigation into Russian contacts with Trump's 2016 presidential campaign was legitimate and appropriate. He was essentially fired for not complying with then President Trump's request that Comey show fealty. And ever since, Donald Trump has promised to pay Comey back, essentially. If I were in Director Comey's shoes, then former Director Comey's shoes, I maybe wouldn't post things on social media because you have Donald Trump basically pledging that he's going to find a way to get this guy in trouble, to come after him criminally, civilly, come after him some way. And he's made that very clear. He's not shying away from that boast. And here, these seashells don't seem very violent to me, but, they do suggest get rid of Donald Trump politically at the minimum. And that imagery is something that the Secret Service at Donald Trump's behest can now seize upon.
Chris, let me ask you, as a former senior special agent with the Secret Service, what is your read on this?
Well, I think she was pretty accurate when she said that at the behest of the president, the Secret Service is going to look into this, unfortunately. As an agency, we try to go above the political fray. That said, if a sitting president is advising that you need to take a look at something, you inevitably will. Again, the fact that it's a message in seashells, using the vernacular of probably a 1920s gangster as an 86 someone. All that be damned. The fact is, it was made by the former director of the FBI. And candidly, it maybe should have been a little more responsible. It could be argued that, in fact, he knew or should have known the controversies that such a message would bring about. That said, is it going to actually constitute a threat? I doubt it. Is it going to lead to criminal charges? Does this actually warrant getting up to the level of probable cause where you can go in front of a grand jury and get it indicted? I seriously doubt that. And would it ever, in any universe, get to the point of actually a criminal conviction beyond a reasonable doubt? I seriously doubt that as well.
I don't like doing the whataboutism, but this screams for it, and so I'm gonna touch on it as I did a moment ago. And Chris, I want to ask you about the image that, again, we're not showing of that President Trump reposted of President Biden hogtied in the back of a pickup truck. It was a guy driving a pickup truck on Long Island, a bunch of Trump flags on top of his car. And in the back of it, there was like a decal image that mimicked the back of the pickup truck on the back of the pickup truck. And it showed President Biden on his side, hogtied. And it looked like that's what was in the guy's car. And the president, who's now the president, who was campaigning back then, retweeted that while President Biden was the president. Can you help me compare the posting of those two images? Are they the same? Are the seashells worse? Why was one investigated and the other not?
I think we hit on that, and that is it was at the behest of a president in one regard and not at the behest of another president. It's unfortunate that potentially criminal investigations can be led in that direction. But in this case, I believe they were. I believe that seashells have risen to the level of a potential threat, whereas that previous post that you mentioned did not, because of that. We live in a time where there was recently, or maybe about 8 years ago, a comedian who held up the false head of the now sitting president, a bloody head of his. And that did not lead to a criminal indictment. That did not lead to criminal charges. Again, I think a lot of the time, unfortunately, it's at the behest of who is in fact in the position of authority at that time.
You know, our NBC News reporters, Sarah Fitzpatrick and Kelly O'Donnell, did some good reporting on this. And they have a former federal prosecutor who's investigated threat cases saying he didn't commit a crime. He gave his enemies an opening.
I think that's a very accurate way of putting it. And Sarah, in her reporting, is referring to the particular statute under which threats are typically prosecuted. And that statute has as its standard a knowing and willful communication of a threat, either through the mail or something else like a social media post. As Chris was just sharing with you, when Kathy Griffin posted that picture of herself on Instagram many years ago, holding what was a fake bloodied head of then President Trump, she was, in fact, investigated. She was put on a no-fly list. That investigation went on for a few months, and yet she was never charged. I think that, in many respects, is maybe a more appropriate comparator than the hog tying that you mentioned, because if that didn't rise to the level of being prosecutable, certainly this does not. People can mean 86 in a variety of ways. Was this blisteringly dumb? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Was it criminal? Likely not.
86 the French fries. We don't have any more French fries in the restaurant. Don't sell them. I mean, that's the way that I think a lot of people see the term 86. It does feel, I mean, I'll make the comparisons and whether they are commiserate, but it also does feel stupid on the part of James Comey.
Absolutely. And it's created an opening for his enemies. I think that's right. And the MAGA propaganda and spin machine is in full effect here. And it's actually having a larger political impact, which is it is intimidating and scaring people from speaking out against Donald Trump. I mean, the Secret Service is going to be really busy if this is the standard now, because 1/3
But
of
is it
Facebook
only going to be the standard for political problems of Donald Trump? He sees James Comey as a political enemy. I mean, it's not going to be, I doubt it's going to be Joe Schmo on Facebook, but if it was Joe Schmo, who happened to be a former member of the administration, who said 2020 was a fair election.
If it's Joe Schmo on Facebook, it could be 1/3 of people on Facebook. It could be 1/3 of people on Twitter and X. And I think that is the intent here, not just to go after his political enemies, but to provide a chilling effect on opposition across the country. And it's having that effect. I'm sure there are lots of people who are scanning their Facebook right now, wondering if they used 86 at any point in the last 20 years, and they're pulling it down. And that is the larger impact that they're having with this agenda, is stifling dissent, pushing down opposition, and intimidating people. And in that regard, I think it's working.